Morning, eighth graders. Um, we are going to do the last chapter in our geology iBook that was posted at the very beginning of the year. I think it was September 13th. Here's the iBook, and then here's the iBook answer sheet. If you open up the answer sheet, it is the last chapter, chapter 5, and there's only one question, and we'll get to that as soon as we're at the end of the chapter. Okay, it starts out talking about, there's a picture here of the San Francisco 49ers, and their team name actually came from it's referencing the gold rush out in California that started in 1848, and a bunch of people fled out to California in 1849 to hopefully claim their piece of the gold that was found out there. And we see references to our very rich mining history throughout the United States and actually worldwide in places, in ways that are that we see today, very common ways, like the name of a football team. Ores are minerals that are extracted because they're really useful. This picture right here is a rock called bauxite, and this is mined to extract the mineral aluminum. Okay, so aluminum, as you know, is a useful mineral. So we take this rock out of the ground, and then we have to go through a big process in order to extract the aluminum out of this rock. All right, the cost of creating a product from a mineral depends on how abundant that mineral is and how much the extraction actually costs. Going through getting the rock out of the ground is really expensive, but then all of the steps to get the mineral out of the rock itself are also really expensive. The environmental damage from the process is often not figured into the product's cost also. So there's something called reclamation that we have to do, that mining companies are obligated to do, to kind of restore the land that they've mined out of back to as close to its original state as possible. And that costs a lot of money as well. So mining companies have to kind of weigh out the cost versus the profit before they even go into operation. There's geologic processes that create and concentrate minerals that are valuable resources. Geologists study these geologic formations and then test the physical and chemical properties of the soil to locate possible ores and determine their size and concentrations. You know, they're not going to go down into the ground and mine a deposit that is too small, right? Some of these deposits are massive, huge, huge, huge deposits. And that is kind of what they're looking for. A mineral deposit will only be mined if it is profitable. Concentration of minerals is only called an ore deposit if it is actually profitable to mine. And there's a lot of different ways to get those minerals out of the ground. So the first type is surface mining, and I have some pictures here. This is a surface mine in New Mexico, the El Chino open pit mine. It's a silver mine. This is a gold pit mine. It's an aerial view in Australia. And this one right here is mountaintop removal, which is another kind of surface mine where they actually take the top off the mountain and then go down that way. And this big mine is in Kentucky. Placers are another, are valuable minerals. That was one of our vocab terms. Placers are valuable minerals that are found in stream gravels. And California actually got its nickname, the Golden State, from the gold rush in 1848. The gold weathered out of really hard metamorphic rock that is found in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And then it traveled down the rivers and settled into these gravel deposits. And so you'd see people out actually there's still hobbyists out there that go and they scoop up these gravel in the curves of these stream beds. They scoop up the gravel and then they do what's called panning for gold, where the heavier minerals will separate out, and then they can extract, what they are there to get, which in this case would be gold or silver. There's also lead, zinc, and chromite and copper in that same area. Underground mining is a is another one. It's kind of what we think of when we think of mining. This is not as widely used as it was before because it is so dangerous and so costly. Dangerous both for the people that work down there because of wall and ceiling collapse. They're sometimes a mile underground. And then also the health effects are, the long-term health effects can be really kind of nasty. Obviously there's very little fresh air down there, and they're breathing in all of these particles that are often coal. I've shown you guys pieces of coal that is mined out of the ground here in Minnesota, actually. So to grind up the rock and get pieces of stuff like this, obviously little minute particles of this are floating around, and they're breathing it in. And there was a lot of people back in the day, before they had a lot of regulations on this, that would get something called black lung disease, which is pretty self-descriptive. It says here, underground mining is very expensive and dangerous. Fresh air and lights must also be brought into the tunnels for the miners, and accidents are really common. We've got some historical tragedies here in Minnesota up at the Sudan mine. That's up by the Boundary Waters, by Tower, Minnesota, by Lake Vermilion. That's one of the largest mines here in Minnesota, and a very popular one in the United States as well. Ore extraction. Okay, so we talked about how getting the rock out, or getting the mineral out of the rock, is just the first step. And then there's all kinds of different things that we got to do after that to make it usable. So it says the ore's journey to becoming a usable material is only just beginning when the ore leaves the mine. Rocks are crushed so that valuable minerals can be separated from the waste rock, and then the minerals are separated out from the ore. There's a few different methods that we use. One is heap leaching. So you get all of you can see right here, this big truck that's got all this raw material that came out of the mine. And then they add chemicals to it, such as cyanide or acid, so pretty toxic, icky things, and that actually removes the ore, so it will dissolve other things around it. Flotation is another thing, and we use that here in Minnesota in our mining of taconite, where they will add a compound that attaches to the valuable mineral, and then it will float. It'll kind of separate out in a liquid. And then smelting is another one, which is a really high temperature roasting of the rock, and it causes it to segregate or separate into layers so that the mineral can be extracted that way. Here in Minnesota, in our history, we have had a lot of iron ore, pure iron ore. You know, we've seen this in class. It's a iron red piece of rock, and you can tell that it's a sedimentary deposit because of you can see that it was laid down in layers. And back when we were taking this out of the ground, there was this other kind of less concentrated version called taconite, and we used to toss that away because it wasn't as valuable or usable as this. Well, now that this has kind of run short, we now today, one of the biggest things that we do for mining is we're taking taconite out of the ground. Taconite is a form of iron ore that is like 30 to 50% iron. So again, not as concentrated. And so they take that out of the ground, and then they crush it up. I've got kind of pieces of the process here. They crush it up into these little rocks that don't look like anything spectacular. It's just a really hard gray little stone. So they crush up these big pieces of rock that they take out of the ground into these little stones, and then they will grind this up into a really, really fine powder that is like soot that you would find in a fireplace. I'll just dip my finger in here and show you. Very, very messy stuff. From here, this is called Taconite Concentrate. From here, they will roll it into these tiny little pellets. These pellets right here. They're about the size of a marble. And these are what are loaded onto the big barges that you see if you've ever been down to Canal Park in Duluth, or you go up the North Shore into Taconite Harbor. They've got this big facility there that loads this stuff onto those big barges, and then it travels through the Great Lakes to steel making locations like along the Great Lakes somewhere in Ohio and Illinois and Detroit, Michigan. Like there's a lot of different places that have very large steel making companies. Okay, so we have a little video right here, Minnesota iron mining process, and it kind of talks mostly about a little bit about our history, but also about taconite. If you go back to, again, you go back to the classroom, back down to the geology iBook, then you can watch that video. And there's one question in the chapter, and that one question is, what ore is abundant in Minnesota? Okay, and you're going to answer that on this Google Doc, Chapter 5, Finding and Mining Ores. Answer that question right here, and then you can go ahead and finally turn this in. Because we have changed our learning plan 3 times since this iBook was originally put out, I'm sorry that you have to go back into the archives to find it. Now that we are distance learning, our next unit will be all kind of grouped into these weekly things, so it'll be easier to find. Okay, so that concludes our geology iBook. Our next unit will be coming out probably next week. This week we're going to be wrapping up geology by doing a couple different things, a couple standards-based assessments, and a little quiz on rock types and the rock cycle. And then we will move on. I hope you're well.